Today, I'm going to break down all the costs associated with lifestyle here in Northern Cyprus so that you can figure out for yourself whether it's a feasible strategy for you to relocate to this island in 2025 with still keeping your standards or maintaining your standards of life that you're having right now back in your home country. And of course, I'm going to start with one of the most important topics, which is housing and rent. In my previous videos, I mentioned quite a few times that in here in Northern Cyprus, a two-bedroom apartment can be acquired anywhere from 120,000 to 150,000 pounds. So that has not changed. We still have quite a bit of options of housing for those prices available. But what about rent? One-bedroom apartment can be rented anywhere from 400 euros to 600 euros per month. And please bear in mind, my dear friends, that it's a long-term rental with a minimum term of 6 months to a year, okay? And with a long-term rental, you would normally be expected to pay 2 months in advance, leave 2 deposits, and 1 commission for the agent. Two-bedroom apartment would cost you anywhere from 600 euros to 800 euros with the same terms and conditions being applicable for long-term rental. And I'm talking about the prices within the city infrastructure where there are schools nearby, hospitals, shops, restaurants, etc. So it's a city living type of lifestyle, or it's in a very close proximity to the city center. However, if you don't require any infrastructure nearby, if you don't have the kids that need to attend school, and you are happy to live in a rural, very peaceful and quiet surrounding, in that case, you would be expected to pay anywhere from 15 to 30% less for your rental. Now, let's talk about utility bills that you would be expected to pay on a monthly basis. I'm going to start with water bill as the easiest one. Water bill would range anywhere from 10 to 15 euros per month, depending on your property type. Maintenance is another fee that you would be expected to pay on a monthly basis, and it can range drastically in terms of the cost depending on the type of the complex and depending on the complex itself. The average maintenance fee when you live within a complex would be somewhat 50 euros. However, we also have complexes, very modern ones, like all-inclusive type of resorts, where the maintenance fee can exceed 200 euros per month. So bear that in mind, my dear friends. What about internet, you would ask me? Well, my dear friends, we live on the island, and just like on any other islands, I would expect, it's not the greatest coverage that we can have over here. But again, there are solutions. Of course, there are expensive options such as Starlink that you can acquire in here and get it installed. And if your work is heavily depending on the internet connection, let's say you're a trader, then I would say Starlink would be the best option because it works without interruptions. You make enough money to actually cover those expenses, but I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly the cost of that equipment, okay? That's something you will need to find out for yourself. The regular internet options that we have in here is more than sufficient and enough for regular day life, and I'm talking about work, communicating with the clients over internet, watch movies, for the kids to do the homework, etc. And that sort of internet, it doesn't cost much. The bill would vary anywhere from 10 euros to 20 euros, depending on the provider, depending on the location, and depending on the speed that you acquire. And again, if there are any interruption with the cable internet and you don't have the Starlink, in that case, I would always use a data on my mobile phone because the coverage is a lot better when it comes to mobile network. We have 2 main providers, which is Turkcell and Vodafone, and they have somewhat similar quotes for the payment plan that you have on a monthly basis. The payment plan would range anywhere again from 10 euros to 20 euros, depending on the data usage that you acquire. In my case scenario, I use a Turkcell provider and I acquire 100 gigabytes of data per month, along with the minutes being provided for overseas calls as well as the local calls. And let me tell you, that's more than enough to cover your basic living requirements in terms of the internet usage, as well as cover any interruption of the local cable that you might be having during the daytime in your working routine. Last but not least is the electricity bill, and it's a very complex topic, but let me try and break it down for you. So the electricity here in Northern Cyprus is built using a tiered pricing system, meaning the more you consume, the higher the rate per kilowatt is. As a result, progressive electricity tariffs, they can vary drastically depending on the size and the type of your property, as well as the quality of the equipment, or let's say air conditioning units you use to heat up or cool off your apartment or a villa. During coldest months of winter, which are January and February, the regular temperature during daytime would range anywhere from +15 to +20. If the sun is out, it would be closer to +20. If the sun is not out, it would be closer to +15, okay? So you wouldn't really require any heating equipment to be used during the daytime. Whereas during nighttime, the temperature goes down to anywhere from +7 to +10. That's most likely the time that you would acquire some sort of heating system to be active, right? For you to stay warm within your property. And there are 2 months during summertime that you cannot imagine yourself living without use of air conditioning, okay? And those months are July and August. And if you're staying indoors, daytime, nighttime, I mean, if there is a little bit of wind, you can skip the air conditioning and just can leave the windows open. But during daytime, my dear friends, if you're staying indoors, air conditioning is a must because you're not going to survive otherwise. You would be heavily relying on air conditioning or any other heating system only 4 months a year. The rest 8 months of the year, you would not require any heating system or any cooling system because it's cool enough to stay cool and it's warm enough to stay warm. And as we all know, the heaviest consumption of electricity lies on the heating system and cooling system, right? So if you don't use those, of course, your bill for electricity is going to be extremely low. Because let's say based on my case scenario, and trust me, I'm that kind of person, I don't economize on electricity and I use every single appliance possible in this life to ease my workload on a daily routine. So for 8 months a year, my electricity bill does not exceed 1,000 Turkish lira per month, which is 20 euros for you. Whereas during winter time, the coldest month of the year of January and February and hottest months of summer, July and August, my bill ends up being roughly about 3,000 Turkish lira, which is 60 euros for you. And again, I'm talking about 2-bedroom apartment, okay? 2-bedroom apartment, 8 months of the year, you would roughly pay 20 euros per month. 4 months of the year, your bill would not exceed 60 euros per month. But things are very different when it comes to villas. And believe me, I've seen different types of bill, anywhere from 200 euros going all the way up to 1,000 euros per month. And let me explain you why. Well, first of all, it heavily depends on what kind of equipment, heating or cooling equipment a villa has and the size of the villa, of course, because we can be talking about 3-bedroom, 1-story bungalow of 150 square meters, and we can be talking about a mansion of 3-story with like 7 bedrooms in it. Of course, the electricity bill is going to be very different. One thing to note, my dear friends, it's a very pointless task to heat up or cool off a big villa with the use of old type of air conditioning units. You know, those ones that were produced like 10 to 15 years ago. They are not efficient. First of all, they consume electricity like a plane, so much of it that your bill can exceed actually 800 euros if you use those. In turns, it's better to acquire a modern type of equipment. I'm talking about inverter type of air conditioning with AAA++++ that is being produced today. They're not, it's a heavy expense to buy them, but at the same time, it's going to economize you a lot of electricity and it's very efficient when it comes to consumption. So if it's a bungalow of up to, 150 square meters, let's say, and you acquire a modern type of air conditioning, which is inverter air conditioning, that it will be more than sufficient. And you might end up paying maybe 100 euros or 150 euros, right? Just having air conditioning, whether it's cooling or heating. Any modern villa nowadays will have the underfloor infrastructure in place with the connection to the gas tank, as well as the radiators across the house with connection to the gas tank as well. It can be one or another, or it can be both together, again, depending on the size of the villa. That economises a lot of money because gas is very inexpensive in here. Whereas during summertime, the bigger your property is, the less cooling it requires because that side of property doesn't heat up as easily by the sun. Whereas during wintertime, if you have the modern infrastructure in place, your bill would range anywhere from 300 to 500 euros, depending again on the size of the property and how modern the equipment is. So enough of the bills, that's pretty much everything that you need to pay. In total, it would come up to anywhere from 100 euros to 200 euros, of course, depending on the complex, depending on the type of the property. But in my case, I don't pay more than 100 euros per month if we take on an average for the whole year. Now let's talk about groceries and daily essentials. One thing that I'm going to draw the attention to, my dear friends, is we live on an island, okay? And aside of the fact that it's not a recognized country, and of course, if we get anything important from a third country, it gets double taxed. Why? Because we get all the imports via Turkey, so there is a custom duty tax that's applied in Turkey, and there is a custom duty tax that's applied in Northern Cyprus. That's one thing to know, because some of the things might seem very expensive over here. But again, if you have the opportunity to go to the south, you can always acquire any essentials that you might need in terms of medication, or whether it's any sanitary type of product, you can always acquire them on the south. So same thing applies to food. If we get any food imported from other countries via Turkey, of course, it's going to be slightly more expensive than on the mainland. So that's one of the reasons why me and my son, we're a family of 2, we try to eat seasonal over here, because you see, all the greens, vegetables and fruits, they are produced, I mean, not all of them, of course, but they are produced here in northern Cyprus. And let me tell you this, aside of the fact that it's summer all year round, right, you would just think that there is no seasonal terms. Not, my dear, there are, because there are hottest months of the summer when plants require a lot more watering because the sun is very strong, okay? And once plants require more watering, they will come at a heavier cost, meaning that it's going to be high in price once it in the grocery shop. In here, you can actually find yourself in a situation where one day you go to a shop and you see a price for cucumbers being 5 Turkish lira, which is a few cents, right? On another day, the price might exceed 100 Turkish lira, which is 2.5 euros. I mean, we've seen potatoes price being up to 150 Turkish lira, which is 3 euros, 3.5 euros. But then again, the government has put the restriction on the price level, and now it does not exceed 1 euro. Most of the time, it's 40 Turkish lira. Let's say in my case scenario, we're a family of 2, it's me and my son. And as I said, we try to eat seasonal and we try to eat healthy. So grains, they would never cost you a lot of money. They're always cheap. When it comes to pasta as well, same thing as overseas. When it comes to vegetables and fruits and greens, you know, we try to eat seasonal. You just adapt to the menu to whatever is season for, particularly today. Let's say if it's a watermelon season, we'll eat watermelons because the price would never exceed 1 euro. If it's a season for strawberries, we would eat plenty of strawberries because a kilo of strawberries would cost you 1 euro as well. So if we talk about general products like eggs or meats or milk, you know, prices somewhat stay the same. So let's say 1 liter of milk, which is free of pesticides and preservatives, will cost you roughly 1 euro. A basket of 30 eggs would cost you roughly 3 euros. The most expensive product in here, I would say, is the lean beef meat. The price for that per kilo would be roughly 15 euros. Okay, that's a very expensive price comparing to the European type of countries. But again, you know, it is what it is. Fishing and farming is something that's very popular over here too. And of course, we've got fish accessible to you. And if you go to the market on Saturdays, you can acquire fish a lot cheaper in price comparing to the grocery shops type of prices. So let's say a dorado, like a big one, would cost you, at the market, would cost you roughly about 300 Turkish lira per kilo, which is 6 euros. Whereas in the shop, it will be a double price. Same thing applies to king prawns or salmon or any other fish or sea products that you might want to buy. So let's say king prawns in the market shop would cost you roughly 400 Turkish lira, which is 8 euros, whereas in the shop, of course, it's going to be double priced. We've got a production of chicken meat in here, and of course, chicken would cost you somewhere the same like it is compared to Europe. 1 kilo of chicken breast would roughly cost you 200 Turkish lira, which is 4 euros. So what I would like to say in conclusion, my dear friends, we as a family of 2, me and my son, we roughly spend 1,000 euro per month on our grocery shopping and daily essentials. And as I said, we don't economize much, but we try to eat seasonal and healthy. What about dining out? Well, dining out used to be very, very cheap in here back in the days, I would say 4 to 5 years ago. I mean, you could dine in a restaurant for 5 euros, but not anymore. Nowadays, an average bill that you would be expected to pay per person would range anywhere from 15 euros to 25 euros, okay? For a decent, very good restaurant with a good service, with an amazing food, I would say me and my son, we go out at least once a week, and the average bill would be anywhere from 40 euros to 50 euros for both of us. But again, certain regions cost a lot less when it comes to dining. So if we take regions, for instance, as Lefkoşa or Buzilur or Gaziantep, the average price per person to dine out would be at least 30% cheaper. It doesn't reflect on the quality of food or quality of service, not at all. It's just the regions where a majority of the local population lives, okay? And because of that, I guess the prices are somewhat lower by 30% at least, comparing to the regions like Iskele or Girne or even the Saint-Tropez itself. What about transportation, you'd ask me? Well, I've mentioned before quite a few times that public transport is practically non-existent here in northern Cyprus. Of course, we do not have trains. We do not have big buses unless it's buses going from Meritz, you know, taking the workers in and out. We have vans that are accessible to the public in the major cities such as Nicosia or Girne or Famagusta itself, right? Are they cheap? Yes, they are cheap. You would be expected to pay anywhere from 40 to 50 Turkish lira, which is equivalent to 1 euro for a journey. But are they convenient? No, they're not convenient. There's no air conditioning. They're not consistent. There are no timetables. You just wait on the road, you know, until it passes by. And trust me, not every single time it has to stop if you're standing there. So I would not rely on the public transport. I would get myself a car. Cars are very inexpensive in here, especially when it comes to second-hand cars. Okay, you can get yourself a decent Toyota for anywhere from 6,000 to 7,000 pounds. And trust me, that's going to save you a lot of money because If you acquire rental of the car, the rental of the car would roughly cost you 500 euros per month on a long-term basis, which is a very hefty expense per year. So I would say it's better you get a car if you decide to relocate in here permanently or temporary. So what about expenses when it comes to having your own car? So let's say gas is very cheap over here. It's equivalent to $1 per liter. So me having to travel a lot across the island due to my workload, I fill up my gas tank about once per week. The total cost of that comes up to about 140 euros per month. That's in my case. In your case scenario, things might be very different because the distances, if you live within one region, are very short. Let's say from my house to a school where I'm taking my son to is only 3.5 kilometers. From me to the city center of Girne is only 15 kilometers. Wherever I go, I don't spend too much time getting to the final destination. So again, we economize on the amount of petrol that we use in here, just because we're having short distances from point A to point B. Car insurance is something that's very inexpensive over here. So let's say in my case, I have Mazda CX-3 SUV of 2019, and last time I paid only 85 euros per year for one-sided coverage for my car insurance. There is also road tax that you would be expected to pay. Road tax would roughly come up to 70 euros per year, and a periodical vehicle technical inspection that you have to undergo once per 3 years, and the cost of it is roughly 80 euros as well. So to conclude, my dear friends, let's say in my case scenario, when I use a lot of gas because I travel a lot, I end up paying 150 euros per month on my car expenses and travel expenses. Healthcare and insurance, my dear friends. So let me tell you about the quality of it. The quality of it is very decent. We have a lot of private clinics and hospitals, okay? And just like the same way it works in Turkey, you know that a lot of Europeans go to Turkey to conduct some sort of procedures, whether it's hair transplantation or maybe any surgery, or maybe dental services. So same thing is very rapidly developing over here, and we've got plenty of services being provided as a private healthcare. But what about the prices? Okay, let me try to break it down for you. First of all, there is a compulsory health insurance that you pay for every single time you apply for your residency. And it's equivalent to 50 euros. So it's not a hefty expense, but again, it doesn't give you the access to the private clinics. It's only the public hospitals in case of emergency. What about private health insurance, you would ask me? Let me break it down. So once it comes to private health insurance, we've got basic coverage and we've got comprehensive coverage, okay? The basic coverage, it includes regular services and emergencies. If you are a young individual up to 30 years of age, you would roughly be expected to pay up to 350 euros per year. If you're a middle-aged individual up to let's say 50 years of age, you would be expected to pay up to 500 euros per year. And if you are older than that, the price goes up to 800 euros per year. And that's a basic plan coverage. Whereas comprehensive plan, that includes any type of surgeries that you might require or maybe dental services, would cost you quite a bit more. So for young individuals, the price goes up to 600 euros per year. For the middle-aged one, up to 50 years of age, it goes to 800 euros per year. And for over 50 years of age, you would be expected to pay roughly 1,200 euros per year. In case you are a young individual and you don't have any concerns when it comes to your health, you don't have to acquire a private health insurance here in Northern Cyprus. In case you don't acquire private health insurance and you are in need of the services, let me give you a little bit of the pricing points. Let's say if you decide to go and undergo a full medication body check, including x-rays, cancer screening, various analyses and tests to be done, ultrasound and heart screening, the whole package would roughly cost you anywhere from 350 euros to 400 euros, depending on the clinic. Dental services are very accessible over here comparing to Europe. If you go to a clinic and you require 1 or 2 teeth to be fixed with a filling, let's say, you would be expected to pay anywhere from 50 euros to 100 euros. And another example that I can give you is recently I had one surgery. It was a minor surgery, but still I had to stay within a hospital for 12 hours. And it was a general anesthesia that I had to undergo, along with all the tests being done prior and after checkup and things like that, and staying within a hospital. I've paid 1,000 euros, my dear friends. Now let's move on to costs that are associated with children, in case you have any. Well, the heftiest expense that I do have to bear is actually my son's education. You see, we have British schools in here in Northern Cyprus, right? But the cost of them has gone up drastically in the last few years. Let's say when we first came, I only paid £4,000 per annum Whereas right now, for the upcoming year, I would be expected to pay £8,000 for his 7th grade. So equivalent of that would roughly come up to €950 per month per child of school fees. That's in case if you decide to acquire British education. Although we do have other options. We have local municipality schools that are free of charge if you're a resident, but the lessons are taught in Turkish, in the local language, and your kid will have to take the test to prove that he or she has a certain level of Turkish language to be able to attend that school. Aside of the public Turkish education, we also have Turkish private schooling options, and they're somewhat a little bit cheaper than the British ones, I would say, but still you would be expected to pay roughly £7,000 per annum. But other options you might consider if that cost is too heavy for you is the online options, because we live in a digital world right now, and there are plenty of school options available online in different languages that are very accessible in terms of the cost. You would be expected to pay anywhere from €1,000 to €3,000 per annum attending online classes per year, my dear friends, depending on what school it is. In addition to the school fees, I bear some little extra expenses because we attend extra classes. So when it comes to my son, again, as an example, he does go for football classes 4 times a week, and I pay €100 per month. He also attends extra math classes twice per week, and the amount I have to pay comes up to €80 per month. Plus, we go to volleyball 3 times a week, and that costs us only €20 per month again. So all in all, extra expenses for extra classes, I end up paying roughly about €200 per month on the top of the school fees. Extra activities in terms of leisure, such as cinema, trampolines, laser tag, or any other games, would normally not cost more than €10 per session. And of course, we attend those like once per week also. So if you have children, bear in mind that you might end up spending up to €1,200 per kid in here if you don't economize on the activities or the schooling fees. When it comes to me, I'm not that expensive as my son is. So I do enjoy extra things like subboarding, any water activities, but I have the equipment, so I don't have to pay for it. The only thing that I have to pay for is the yoga classes, and the price of that is €60 for 2 classes per week. So to conclude, my dear friends, let me give you a quick brief summary on what has been said. So as a homeowner, having my son and having to pay for his British education, I end up spending roughly about €2,750 per month. That's for 2 of us on all the daily essentials and bills and everything else like that. In case you're renting an apartment, your daily living expenses would be increased by roughly €700 to €800 and will come up to somewhere around €3,500 per month. In case you don't have any children and you don't need to spend on the cost associated with children, in that case scenario, if you own your own apartment, you would be very well off with having €1,500 in your pocket for 2 people living within one household. Whereas if you don't own a property, you would probably end up spending anywhere from €2,000 to €2,300 per month if you need to rent a place. That's pretty much all, my dear friends. I hope this information helps you understand the current situation and determine whether relocating over here is something that is feasible for you with the current level of income. If you do have any specific inquiries, do not hesitate to contact me directly. Otherwise, you can leave a comment below with the questions that you might have, and I will happily support the conversation. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you soon.